She had loved him the way you love a place you've only ever seen in photographs, certain of its beauty, uncertain of the distance. The night Laine Mercer rode the elevator up to the 42nd floor of Vance Tower, with a small ceramic bowl wrapped in brown paper at the bottom of her tote bag, she had decided, finally and completely, that she was done being uncertain about anything. The bowl was the color of a September sky just before rain. She had made it herself, which mattered to her in a way she hadn't fully analyzed. She threw pottery on weekends in the back room of her cafe, mostly small things, bowls and mugs and shallow dishes she set out alongside the pastries, and sometimes sold to customers who asked. This one she'd made 3 weeks ago, when she first started thinking about how she would tell him. She'd glazed it twice to get the color right. She planned to set it in front of him, fill it with something, soup maybe, or a piece of the brown butter cake she'd been perfecting all autumn, and then say the words she had been rehearsing since Tuesday. I need to tell you something. Something good, I think. I hope it's good. She had a key to his building's private entrance on the east side of the tower. That was how their relationship existed, through side entrances, through the careful architecture of his discretion. She had told herself this was temporary, that it made sense given who he was. The Vance name in Nashville moved the way weather moved, without asking permission and without accounting for what it flattened. She told herself tonight would reorganize everything. She had been with Remington Vance for 8 months, not publicly. She should have turned right at the second corridor junction. She had been to the private floor a dozen times and knew the layout, and she still turned left because she was distracted, because the bowl was pressing against her ribs through the canvas of the bag, because her hands were cold and her heart was doing something irregular, and she kept thinking about his face when she finally said the words. The hallway she turned into ran along the outer wall of the east dining room. A family dinner, he had texted that afternoon. Won't run past 9. Come up around 8:30. Use the side key. She was early. She was always early. The dining room door was not fully closed. She heard her own name first. One of the voices, older, with the flat particular authority of a man who has never been interrupted, said Laine, "The way you say the name of a minor inconvenience," and Remington answered. "She's temporary." His voice was calibrated, controlled, the voice he used in rooms like this one. "I've been managing it. She doesn't fit into this, and she's not going to." Someone laughed. Someone mentioned an arrangement, a timeline, a name she didn't recognize, and Remington said, "I'll handle it. You don't need to concern yourself." She didn't move. Some mechanism in her body simply refused to process the instruction to leave. She stood in that hallway with her tote bag against her chest and the bowl inside it, and she listened to the man she loved explain to his family who she was, or rather, who she wasn't. She doesn't fit into this. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach, the same way she had in the elevator when she was still telling herself it was going to be okay. The gesture felt entirely different now. She walked away. She walked back through the corridor, through the private entrance, into the elevator, down through the lobby, and out onto the street. Nashville was doing what it always did, moving at its own velocity, indifferent to the specific wreckage of one woman's Tuesday evening. She stood on the curb and breathed cold air and thought, I was going to tell him tonight. The bowl was still in her tote bag. She didn't take it out. She flagged a rideshare and went home and sat on the bathroom floor for a long time before she moved again. She called her mother at 5:30 in the morning. Dottie Mercer answered on the second ring, which told Laine everything about the kind of sleep her mother had been having. I'm coming home, Laine said. Can I come home? I've got the back room made up, her mother said. How soon? She was in Knoxville by noon. The back room on Sutherland Avenue had been hers through high school and college, and the 2 years she spent not quite knowing what she wanted before she opened the cafe. The same patchwork quilt, the same lamp with the dented shade. She set her bags down and sat on the edge of the bed and didn't cry because she wasn't there yet. She was in the strange white space between knowing and feeling, where the mind is still catching up to what the body has already absorbed. The bowl went into the closet, on the highest shelf, still wrapped in brown paper. She told her mother about the pregnancy on the second day. Dottie listened the way she listened to everything important. Completely still, both hands wrapped around her coffee mug, her eyes steady and open. When Laine finished, Dottie said, "And the father?" "I heard him tell his family I was temporary." Laine looked at the table. He didn't know I was there. Dottie was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" "I'm keeping it, her. I think it's a her." Dottie set down her mug. She reached across the table and put her hand over Laine's. She didn't say anything else, which was exactly right. If you've ever been loved by someone who knows when to speak and when to simply be present, this story is for you. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this one travels. And if you're new here, stay until the end, because what happens next is going to stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Laine did not return Remington's calls. They started 4 days after she left. Tentative at first, one voicemail with nothing in it except "call me when you can," then more frequent, then stopped by the third week. She told herself the silence was what she wanted. She almost believed it. What she didn't know was that 700 feet above the Nashville skyline, in the penthouse whose east corridor she had walked away from, Remington Vance was beginning to understand the specific architecture of his own carelessness. His building concierge mentioned it over the phone 3 weeks after the dinner. A woman matching Laine's description had been near the east hallway that evening. Medium height, dark coat, canvas tote bag. Remington asked her to repeat the part about the bag. Then he sat in his office, with his hands pressed flat on the desk, and understood, with the particular precision of a man who has just been handed the last piece of an unbearable puzzle, exactly what had happened. He called his cousin Whitfield that afternoon. Whit found information the way a good researcher finds it, patiently, through the accumulation of verifiable detail. What he found in 48 hours was this: Laine Mercer had visited her OB-GYN in Nashville 6 days before the night of the family dinner. The appointment was logged as an initial prenatal consultation. Whit delivered this over the phone. There was a pause after he finished. "Don't tell anyone," Remington said. "Of course not. Find out where she is." He meant it differently from how he had ever meant anything. She was in Knoxville, her mother's house on Sutherland Avenue. Whit had the address within 24 hours and relayed it with the neutral efficiency of a man who understood that this particular information required handling with both hands. Remington flew to Knoxville on a Tuesday. Commercial flight, no advance team, no Whit. He booked a room at a small hotel on Kingston Pike under his middle name, a precaution, not a deception. He unpacked his bag and sat on the edge of the hotel bed and felt, for the first time in his adult life, the full unmediated weight of what he had said through that door. He drove past her mother's house once, a white craftsman bungalow on a street lined with maples going gold, a light on in the kitchen, a wreath on the door. He kept driving. He found her the next morning at a farmer's market 2 blocks from the downtown square. She was at a pottery stall, not buying anything, just looking. Her coat was the color of pine needles, and she had her hair pulled back, and she was studying a row of small bowls with the specific attention of someone who knows exactly what good work looks like. He sat on a bench 20 feet away and waited. She knew he was there before he said a word. He was certain of it in the way you are certain of things about someone you've spent 8 months learning. "You found a farmer's market," she said, without turning. "I found you first. The market was a coincidence." She turned then. She looked at him. He didn't arrange his expression. He let her look at whatever she needed to see. "Why are you here?" she said, not a question. "Because you were in that hallway," he said, "and you didn't make a sound, and you left, and I need you to know that. I know that." She turned back to the stall, a long silence. Around them the market moved. Coffee cups and kettle corn, someone's kid asking about honey, the particular Saturday energy of people who have nowhere more important to be. Knowing it, she said, doesn't change what you said. I'm not here because I think it changes it. She exhaled slowly. I was coming to tell you something that night, Rem. She said his name quietly, and he could tell it cost her something. I had been carrying it for 2 weeks. I was so completely certain that what we had was real, that you were real, and then I stood in that hallway and I listened to you tell your father I was something you were managing. He said nothing. And the worst part, she said, still not looking at him, wasn't the word. It was that you didn't hesitate. There was no pause, no correction. You just said it. She picked up a small blue bowl from the display, turned it in her hands, like it was already true. It wasn't true, he said. None of it was what I actually believed. I know that. She set the bowl down. That's not the part that hurt. She let him walk beside her through the market. Not close. She maintained distance with the deliberateness of someone who knows exactly where her edges are. She told him she was keeping the baby, that she had a doctor, that she was stable, that she did not need him managing her logistics. He said he wasn't worried about logistics. She asked what he was worried about. He said, you, just you. She looked at him sideways, weighing whether that sentence deserved any credit. Don't come to my mother's house unannounced, she said, and don't follow me. I won't. Good, a pause. Go back to your hotel. He went back to the hotel and extended his reservation by 2 weeks. He didn't tell her. He found her rhythms without surveillance, through the simple mechanics of being present in a small city. He found the coffee shop she walked to on Thursday mornings. He found the running path along the river. He held all of this carefully, the way you hold something you don't have the right to squeeze, and he did not intersect with any of it. He was just there, in the city, in the same radius of ordinary life. Proximity was the only honest thing he had to offer. Then Whit called on a Thursday and said, "Your father knows where you are." Remington was quiet. "He sent Aldridge," Whit said. Remington's jaw tightened. Aldridge was his father's family attorney, not the one who handled litigation, the one who handled situations. He specialized in elegant pressure, in offers that came wrapped in so much generosity they were impossible to recognize as what they actually were. If he goes near her. That's why I'm calling, Whit said quietly. You need to move first. Aldridge knocked on Dottie Mercer's door on a Wednesday afternoon. Dottie answered. She listened to everything the man said, the concern, the generosity, the arrangement the Vance family was prepared to offer, the figure in the envelope, the single condition attached, which was that Laine raised the child quietly, privately, with the understanding that certain entanglements with certain families were simply better left untangled. Dottie waited until he finished. Then she said, "You can tell Franklin Vance that my daughter understands the difference between charity and a threat." She closed the door. Laine was in the kitchen. She had heard every word. Her hands were flat on the table and her jaw was locked, and she sat like that for a moment before she picked up her phone and called Remington. He answered on the first ring. "He came," she said. The silence on his end lasted exactly 2 seconds. "Are you okay?" "Your father sent someone to my mother's house with an envelope." Her voice was level, which was the most frightening thing about it, that absolute zero temperature, to make me disappear. Laine. My mother closed the door in his face. A pause. "I need you to understand what just happened here, and I need to know whether you're going to do something about it or just understand it, because those are 2 different things." He was already in the car. He drove to Sutherland Avenue in 11 minutes. Dottie had left the door unlocked. He walked into the kitchen and found Laine at the table exactly as she'd described. Hands flat, jaw set, eyes that were not frightened but were the nearest thing to it. The look of someone who has just been told something they already suspected and is now waiting to see what you do with the confirmation. He sat down. He called his father. He did it in Dottie Mercer's kitchen, in front of Laine, in the November light, coming through the window over the sink. Franklin Vance answered on the second ring. Remington did not manage the conversation the way he had managed every conversation with his father for 34 years. He did not layer or deflect or structure anything. He said, "You sent Aldridge to Laine's mother's house." His father said nothing. You sent him with an envelope and a condition, Remington said. Incorporate this into every decision you make from this point forward. Laine and this child are under my protection, not the family's, mine. If anyone from this family contacts her in any form, by any means, they will not be dealing with Laine. They will be dealing with me. His father said very quietly, You're choosing her over the family. Remington looked at Laine across the table. I'm choosing to stop making the mistake I already made once, he said. He ended the call. The kitchen was very quiet. Laine looked at him with an expression that was not yet trust, but was the beginning of a question that might become one. Okay, she said. He understood what it cost her to say it. He flew back to Nashville the next morning and did what he had been moving toward for weeks. He met his father and the family attorneys in the Vance Group offices and formally separated his personal assets from the family holding structure. He established independent financial arrangements. He filed through his private attorney a declaration of personal protection for Laine Mercer and their child, witnessed, notarized, on record. And then his brother Thaddeus walked into the conference room 20 minutes late with the particular expression of someone who believes they've already won. Tad was 29. He had been sitting at Vance family tables his entire life, learning that information was power and deployment was strategy. What Witt had found, delivered to Remington the night before in a voice that warned him to put down whatever was in his hands, was this. Thaddeus Vance had placed a call to a Nashville gossip outlet 6 weeks ago. The article had gone up that morning. Laine Mercer, named in full, the pregnancy, confirmed, and a quote attributed to a Vance family source, stating that Laine had pursued the relationship with calculated intent and that the pregnancy was a strategic decision. Remington had read it in a parking garage at 6:45 in the morning, and something in him had gone very still and then very cold, in the way of things that move below anger into something more permanent. He had called Laine before he left the garage. She answered immediately, which meant she had already seen it. My name is in a news article, she said. Her voice was ice water, as someone who planned to trap you. I know. Women I trained with at the hospital are texting me, Rem. I know. The article will be down before noon, that I can do right now. A pause long enough to mean something. Who? My brother. He had the article taken down in 40 minutes. He forwarded the confirmation to Laine without comment. She sent back 4 words. Thank you. Now go. He drove to his father's house in Brentwood that evening. Franklin's car was in the drive. Tad's was there too. He walked in and found the family mid-dinner. His father, 2 of the firm's senior partners, Tad at the far end of the table with a glass of wine and the expression of a man who has been rehearsing a defense for days. Remington didn't take Tad aside. He had made that decision on the drive over, and he held to it. He set his phone on the table in front of his brother. The screen showed the article, Laine's full name in the headline, the fabricated quote below it. Read it out loud, he said. Tad looked at him. Rem. Out loud, in front of everyone at this table. The room went still. Franklin looked at the phone. The partners looked at the tablecloth. Tad looked at Remington with the expression of someone who has just realized the ground they chose to stand on is not what they thought it was. I was protecting the family, Tad said. His voice had changed. You told a journalist that the mother of my daughter calculated a pregnancy to trap me, Remington said, not loudly, quietly, in the way of things that don't need volume because they are already exactly what they are. That's what's in that article. That's what the women she trained alongside read this morning while she was sitting at her mother's kitchen table. That's what is going to exist in some form on the internet, regardless of how many times it gets taken down. He looked at his brother directly. You decided she was a problem to be solved. You decided her reputation was a tool you had the right to use. A pause. Say, in front of everyone at this table, what you actually did. Tad was quiet for a long moment. Then, I gave a reporter a quote that wasn't true, about Laine. And you did it because. The pause this time cost something. because I thought if the story got messy enough, she'd take the settlement and leave. He set his wine glass down. Something in his face had cracked, not guilt exactly, but the beginning of genuine reckoning with the specific shape of what he'd done. I didn't think about what it would do to her. I thought about the family. I know, Remington said. That's what I taught you by example for years, that people outside the family are variables, not people. He picked up his phone. I'm done operating that way. He drove back to Nashville that night and flew to Knoxville the next morning and walked into Dottie Mercer's kitchen and sat down across from Laine and told her what had happened. She listened with her hands wrapped around a plain white mug, and she looked at him when he finished and said, "He said it in front of your father? The whole table?" Yes. Something moved through her expression, not satisfaction. Something quieter than that, and more lasting. "Okay," she said. She had said that word to him before. Each time, it meant something slightly different. The weeks that followed had a structure Remington hadn't anticipated and wouldn't have designed. There was no infrastructure, no office, no driver, no assistant managing the calendar. There was a hotel room he kept extending, and a rental car, and the slow accumulation of small knowledge. He learned which farmer's market Dottie preferred. He learned that Laine's back hurt on the left side in the evenings, and that the heating pad lived under the bathroom sink. He learned that she ate peanut butter crackers at 10 in the morning, and that this was non-negotiable. He learned not to offer help unless she asked, and to help immediately when she did, and to do it without commentary. He restructured the entire shape of his days around what she actually needed rather than what he instinctively wanted to provide, and he did it without announcing that he was doing it, because the announcing would have made it about him. In December, Franklin Vance filed a legal challenge against the asset restructuring. Remington read the letter in Dottie's kitchen, set it on the table, and looked up. "My father is trying to walk it back." Laine looked at him. "Can he?" "No," he said. Sal called it thin. She asked why Franklin was doing it then. He said, "Because it keeps him in the conversation. He built an empire on being the thing everything runs through. He doesn't know how to not be that." She was quiet for a moment then. "Call him. Don't let it drag." He flew to Nashville and met his father at a restaurant on West End they'd been going to since Remington was 19. Franklin arrived first, which was unusual, and stood when Remington walked in, which was more unusual still. They sat. They cleared ground. And then Franklin said, looking at his coffee, "I would like to meet the child when she's born, when Laine is ready." "That's Laine's decision," Remington said. "I know that." And the challenge gets dropped first. Franklin held his gaze, a long considering look, then, "She must matter to you greatly." "Say her name," Remington said. A pause. "Laine must matter to you greatly." "Yes," he said, "she does." Franklin dropped the challenge that week. At 34 weeks, Laine's blood pressure spiked at a routine appointment. Her OB, a direct, unhurried woman named Dr. Hutchins, who had been delivering babies in Knox County for over 2 decades, used the words modified bed rest and weekly monitoring without alarm, but with the particular directness of someone who respects what's at stake. In the car on the way home, Laine said, "I hate this. Not the bed rest. The not controlling part." "You don't have to control this one," Remington said. "Let me carry it." She looked at him, the look that was always a test, that was asking, "Do you actually mean that? Or is this just what you say when you want to be allowed in?" And after a moment she said, "Okay." He did not get tired and put it down. He modified the shape of every day without announcing it. He drove to every appointment. He learned what she could eat and what she couldn't, and the answers changed week to week, and he paid attention and remembered without being asked. He did not make the moment about himself. That discipline, he had come to understand, was not a secondary thing. It was the whole thing. The willingness to show up without making the showing up into something you required gratitude for. On a Thursday night in late February, Laine woke at 2 in the morning. Remington heard her through the wall of the old house. He was in the room at the end of the hall, and he was up before he'd finished processing why. She was standing at the top of the stairs with one hand on the wall, breathing differently, not in pain, just beginning. "How far apart?" he said. "I don't know yet. It's early." 35 weeks isn't. He stopped. That wasn't what she needed. "Okay, I'll get the bag." The bag was in the closet where she'd told him she'd put it 3 weeks ago. He got it. He got his keys. He knocked on Dottie's door and said her name, and when she opened it, wide awake in the instant way of women who have spent decades listening for children in the night, he said, "She's in labor. I'm driving." Dottie was dressed in 4 minutes. The labor was long and hard, not medically catastrophic. Hutchins's expression stayed steady and professional throughout, which Remington watched with the obsessive attention of a man who has no other barometer, but physically demanding in the way that made him understand, not abstractly, but in his whole body, what it meant to give birth. Laine worked through it with the same quality she brought to everything difficult, not performing endurance, just exercising it, which is a different thing entirely. At some point in the small hours, she reached for his hand. She gripped it without looking at him, and he held on, and she worked through something, and then the grip eased, but she didn't let go. He didn't mention it. At 5:47 in the morning, their daughter was born. 5 pounds and 14 ounces. She cried immediately, with the full, committed authority of someone who had arrived early and intended to establish that fact clearly. They put her on Laine's chest, and Laine made a sound he had never heard from her. In 8 months together, 8 months apart, 6 months of building something careful from the rubble, nothing had sounded like that. Every layer stripped back. Just her underneath, just the undisguised truth of what she was feeling, the way you feel things when you are too exhausted and too overwhelmed and too full of love to manage any of it. The nurse turned to him. Did he want to cut the cord? He looked at Laine. She was looking at him, her face completely open in a way he had never seen it open. She nodded. He cut the cord. They put his daughter in his arms. She was so small. He had known, in the abstract way you know things when you've been preparing for months, that a newborn would be small. But knowing and the actual physical reality of holding something that weighs less than a bag of flour and feels in your arms like the most significant weight you have ever been trusted with. Those are not the same thing. She had stopped crying. She was simply looking at nothing and everything, at the new and overwhelming fact of being here. He became aware distantly that he was crying, not performing it, just the body encountering something it has no other mechanism to process. He looked up and found Laine watching him hold their daughter. What was in her face was not yet forgiveness, not yet love renewed, but it was the ground on which both of those things could eventually stand. Solid ground, earned the way solid ground always is, slowly at considerable cost, by people who kept showing up to the work of it. He looked at his daughter. He looked at Laine. "She has your eyes," he said. Laine looked at her daughter in his arms and said very quietly, "I know." They named her Bay. Laine decided it on the second day, lying in the hospital bed with the baby asleep on her chest, in the particular exhausted clarity that comes after you have moved through something enormous. Bay, not a family name, not a Vance name, just a name that belonged to the child herself, that fit the way true things fit without requiring explanation. The months that followed were not soft. They were fragmented sleep and the steep learning curve of two people who had not planned any of this together, figuring out how to function in the same space around a person who communicated entirely through volume and body language. But Remington was fast. He learned Bay's signals before he learned his own routines in the house. He learned the cry that meant hungry versus the one that meant overstimulated. He learned mostly that the most important skill was presence without the requirement that presence be acknowledged. In April, Tad drove from Nashville to Knoxville. He came alone. He knocked on the door on a Saturday morning and Laine answered, and she looked at him the way you look at someone who has caused you a harm that can't be fully undone. Steady, without warmth, but without the door already decided. "I know I owe you something I can't fully repay," he said. "I'd like to try anyway." She looked at him for a moment. "Come in," she said. Remington stayed in the kitchen. He heard the conversation in fragments, confrontation, then explanation, then something quieter. When Tad came to the kitchen doorway afterward, his face had the particular quality of someone who has said true and difficult things and has not been forgiven for them and understands that he doesn't deserve to be yet. "She's extraordinary," he said, simply, without construction. "I know," Remington said. Tad nodded. He sat on the floor of the living room and met his niece, who looked at him with her focused infant attention and then grabbed his finger with her whole fist and held on. That made Tad go quiet in the specific way babies make people go quiet, cutting through everything you've built around yourself and landing somewhere underneath it. Laine, watching from the doorway, eventually went to make coffee. That was not forgiveness. It was the thing that might eventually lead there. Summer came. Bay grew. Laine reopened the cafe in Nashville in June, bringing Bay in for the morning shift in a carrier, where she slept through the espresso machine and the pastry rush with the deep indifference of someone who had decided the cafe was safe. Laine started making pottery again in the evenings. Small things, the same as always. Bowls and mugs and shallow dishes that held the particular quality of objects made by someone who has been thinking carefully about shape. In July, she went to the closet and took the ceramic bowl from the highest shelf. Still in its brown paper, still on the shelf where she'd put it in November. She stood in the bedroom for a moment looking at it, then carried it to the kitchen and set it on the counter and unwrapped it. The wildflower glaze had held. September sky just before rain. She had made it well. She filled it with apples from the market down the street and left it there and said nothing about it. Remington noticed. He looked at it the way you look at something when you understand its entire history without being told. He said nothing either, but the bowl stayed on the counter, and that was its own kind of sentence. In October, 1 year from the night of the hallway, Laine was at the kitchen table with Bay in her lap when Remington came downstairs with coffee. Bay was watching the morning light come through the window, tracking it the way she tracked all light with her whole focused self. Laine was watching Bay. The house was quiet in the particular way it was at 6:30, before the day had made up its mind. "I made that bowl around a year ago," Laine said. "I had it in my bag that night." He sat down across from her. He didn't say anything. "I keep thinking about who I was that afternoon," she said, standing in my studio, glazing it for the second time. So completely certain I was doing the right thing. A brief sound, not quite a laugh, not quite grief. She had absolutely no idea what was about to happen. "Neither did I," he said. "I thought I knew exactly what I was. 34 years old, and I thought I had it organized." He looked at his coffee. "I didn't know anything." She looked at him across the table with Bay between them and the October light doing what it did, going golden and specific and warm, the way it did right before it started to rush toward dark. "Ask me," she said. He looked at her. "What you said in December," she said. "What you told me not to respond to. Ask me now." His hands stilled on the mug. He set it down. "Laine," he said. She waited. "Do you love me?" She held his gaze across the kitchen table with Bay in her lap and the wildflower bowl on the counter behind her, and the whole year between that hallway and this kitchen, complete and accounted for in every one of its days. "Yes," she said. It was not an ending. He understood that immediately, in the way you understand things about someone you have spent a year paying genuine attention to. It was one true thing said plainly, with the full weight of what it had cost her to be able to say it. He breathed. Something happened in her face then, the real smile, the one that had no layer over it, the one he had seen exactly 3 times. When Bay did something new, when Dottie said something unexpected and dry, and now this, now him, in a kitchen on an October morning with the coffee getting cold. He thought about a woman standing in her studio on a September evening, glazing something blue and careful twice to get it right, intending to hand it to someone as evidence that what she felt was real. He thought about that same bowl on the highest shelf of a closet, still wrapped in brown paper for 8 months, then on the counter, then holding apples, still the same bowl, still the same glaze, survived. Bay made a small sound in Laine's lap, the almost word she'd been working toward for weeks, unmistakably pointed in the direction of her mother. Laine looked down at her, her whole face opened, the way it always did, without warning or defense. Remington got up and poured her a fresh cup of coffee and set it in front of her and sat back down. She reached for it without looking up from Bay. The morning continued. The light moved across the floor. The bowl held its apples on the counter, exactly where it belonged. He had given up the architecture, the holdings, the hierarchy, the careful structure of a life built to be impressive from the outside, and he was sitting at a kitchen table in Knoxville, Tennessee, pouring coffee, watching the two people who mattered most to him occupy the same ordinary light. He had never in his life felt less powerful. He had never in his life felt less afraid. He had never in his life felt more like himself, not the version required by rooms like that dining room, but the actual one, the one that had been there the whole time underneath, waiting to find out if it would be enough. It was enough. Laine looked up and caught him looking. She considered him for a moment with that steady, honest look that had always seen more than he meant to show. "You going to keep staring," she said, "or are you going to be useful and hand me that spoon?" He handed her the spoon. The morning opened around them, ordinary and entirely theirs.